could you do this to me? Those files were my entire life's work, and you just tossed them out like trash. Look at me when I'm talking to you.
I stood frozen in this doorway when I saw the empty space where my boxes used to be, 40 years of my life gone. Daniel, where are my files? My voice barely came out. He didn't even look up from his phone. I threw them away. Mom? They were just old papers. Old papers. Those papers held the truth about a case that never felt right. A man whose eyes still haunted me decades later. And now, the only proof I had was gone erased by my own son, like it never mattered. But what Daniel didn't know was that I had once made a copy, and somewhere out there, the truth might still be waiting. If this story already made your heart tighten a little, let me know by liking the video. And if you've ever felt dismissed or unheard in your own family, I'd really love to hear your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. And if you want to follow this journey with me, don't forget to subscribe. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, though I was, not even because I was hurt, though that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I didn't sleep because of something far worse. A memory. It had been buried for years, tucked away inside those boxes Daniel had so casually thrown out like yesterday's trash. But the moment he said the words, I threw them away, something inside me cracked open. And suddenly, I was no longer standing in my quiet suburban home. I was back in Chicago. 1983. Sitting in a dim records office that smelled like dust ink and old secrets. I had been 38 years old then, younger than Daniel is now. I still wore my hair pinned neatly behind my ears, still believed that systems worked the way they were supposed to, that truth always found its way to the surface. Back then, I worked as a legal records analyst for Cook County. It wasn't a glamorous job, no courtroom drama, no dramatic speeches. I wasn't a lawyer or a judge. I was the person behind the scenes. The one who cataloged, verified, and preserved the paper trail. Every report, every transcript, every piece of evidence. If it passed through the system, it passed through someone like me, and I took that responsibility seriously. More seriously than most. I believed records were more than paper. They were memory. They were truth. They were the only thing standing between justice and forgetting. That belief is what led me to Gregory Hale. I still remember the first time I saw his file. It was thicker than most 4 binders stacked together, tied with a faded red ribbon. The label read, People versus Gregory Hale. At the time, it was just another case in a long list of cases, a murder trial that had already been decided. Gregory Hale had been convicted of killing his business partner shot dead in an office late one evening. Open and shut, they said, but something about the file felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't one specific document or a glaring mistake. It was a pattern, a quiet inconsistency that only revealed itself if you were paying attention. And I was always paying attention. The timeline didn't quite line up. Witness statements overlapped in strange ways. One said they saw Hale leaving the building at 9:10 p.m. Another claimed they heard the gunshot at 9:15 p.m. A third insisted the victim was still alive at 9:20 p.m. At first, I thought it was just human error. Memory is unreliable after all. But then I noticed something else. A missing page. In a stack of transcripts, perfectly numbered and organized, page 47 simply wasn't there. No tear, no mark, just a clean jump from 46 to 48. That doesn't happen by accident, not in a legal record. I remember sitting there staring at that gap longer than I should have. my fingers hovering over the paper, my heart doing something I didn't recognize at the time. Doubt. It was the first time I questioned whether what I was preserving was actually the truth. I brought it up to my supervisor, Thomas Whitaker. He had been in the department for over 20 years, respected calm, the kind of man people trusted without thinking. He barely glanced at the file. "Clerical error," he said. "Happens more often than you think. But the witness timelines don't match either," I insisted. He gave me a look I didn't understand back then. Not anger, not irritation. Something colder. "Albert," he said quietly, "your job is to record what's there, not to question it." I remember nodding. I remember going back to my desk, but I didn't let it go. Because something inside me knew this wasn't just a mistake. Over the next few weeks, I kept working on the Hale file. Officially, I was just organizing and archiving it, but privately, I was reading every line like it mattered, like someone's life depended on it, because it did, and the more I read, the worse it got. There was a witness named Michael Torres mentioned briefly in an index, but nowhere else in the main transcripts. No full statement, no cross-examination, just a name and then silence. That didn't make sense. Every witness in a murder trial leaves a trail, unless someone erases it. I started looking for his statement in the overflow files, the ones nobody bothers to check unless they have to. That's when I found it. A single document, misfiled, unindexed, almost invisible. Michael Torres claimed he saw someone else leaving the building that night. Not Gregory Hale. Someone taller. Someone wearing a dark overcoat. Someone who didn't match Hale's description at all. I remember the exact feeling when I read that line. My stomach dropped. Because if that statement was true, then Gregory Hale had been convicted for a crime he didn't commit. And worse, someone had made sure that truth stayed buried. I sat there for a long time holding that paper, my hands shaking just enough that I had to steady them against the desk. I should have reported it. That's what I told myself. I should have taken it straight to a judge, to an attorney, to someone with the authority to reopen the case. But I didn't. And that's the part that still haunts me, because I hesitated. I was afraid. I was afraid of being wrong, afraid of stepping out of line, afraid of what it would mean if the system I trusted wasn't what I thought it was. So instead, I did the only thing I felt I could do at the time. I made copies. Every document that felt wrong. Every inconsistency. Every missing piece I could find. I stayed late after work, feeding page after page into the copier, the machine humming in the quiet office while the rest of the building slept. I told myself it was just for my own records, just in case. Just so the truth wouldn't disappear completely. When I finished, I took those copies home and stored them in boxes. Labeled, "Oh, home," and stored them in boxes. Labeled, "Oh, organized, preserved." I never spoke about them again. Not to my coworkers, not to my friends, not even to my husband before he passed, and certainly not to Daniel. To him, they were just old papers, organized, preserved. I never spoke about them again, not to my coworkers, not to my friends, not even to my husband before he passed, and certainly not to Daniel. To him, they were just old papers, meaningless, worthless, disposable. I leaned back in my chair now, staring at the empty space where those boxes used to be. 40 years of silence. 40 years of carrying something I never had the courage to act on. And now, it was gone. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because as I sat there, something stirred in the back of my mind. A detail. Small. Faint. Easy to forget. But suddenly, it felt important. I had made copies, yes, but not just for myself. There had been a moment right before I retired when the department had been transferring old case files to the state archives, a routine process. Standard procedure. And I remembered thinking, maybe this is enough. Maybe I didn't have to expose anything. Maybe it was enough to make sure the records existed somewhere safe, somewhere they couldn't be altered. I closed my eyes, trying to pull the memory into focus. A form, a signature, a shipment log. And then it hit me. I hadn't just copied those files, I had submitted them to the Illinois State Archives. My eyes snapped open. My heart started beating faster than it had in years. Because if I was right, then Daniel hadn't destroyed the truth. He had only destroyed my copy. And somewhere in a building full of forgotten history, every single page might still be there, waiting. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone with one hand while sipping coffee with the other, as if he hadn't erased 40 years of my life the night before. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. My son, the boy I had once held against my chest, while he cried over scraped knees and broken toys, now sitting there, calm and untouched, while I felt like something inside me had been torn open. "Did you sleep?" he asked casually, not even looking up. "No," I said. He shrugged. "You'll be fine. You're just upset about Clutter being gone. Give it a few days." "Clutter." I let out a quiet breath, gripping the back of a chair just to steady myself. "You threw away evidence," I said. That made him look up. "Evidence?" He gave a short laugh. "Mom, those boxes were falling apart. Half the papers were yellow. I couldn't even read most of it." "You weren't supposed to read them," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. He frowned. "Then what were they for?" That question hung in the air longer than it should have. Because I had never answered it before. Not for him, not for anyone. "They mattered," I said finally. "That's enough." But Daniel shook his head, already dismissing it. "No, it's not enough," he said. "You've been holding on to things that don't mean anything anymore. You keep living in the past, Mom. It's not healthy." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I wasn't living in the past," I said quietly. "I was preserving it." "For what?" he pressed. "For the truth." He stared at me like I had just said something ridiculous. "Truth about what?" "Some old case from the 80s. That's over, Mom. It's done. Whoever was involved, dead in prison or moved on. It do in prison or moved on. It do S&T matter anymore." "It matters," I said louder now. "It always matters." He sighed, setting his phone down like he was preparing for a conversation he didn't want to have. "Know what matters is right now S&T matter anymore." "It matters," I said louder now. "It always matters." He sighed, setting his phone down like he was preparing for a conversation he didn't want to have. "Know what matters is right now," he said. "This house, our situation. I've been trying to talk to you about this for months." I felt my stomach drop slightly. "What situation?" I asked, even though I had a feeling I already knew. Daniel leaned forward, rubbing his hands together like he was rehearsing something. "I'm selling the house," he said. The words landed heavier than I expected. "You? What, it's too big for you?" he continued quickly. "Maintenance alone is a nightmare, and the property value is at its peak right now. It's the smart move." "The smart move," I repeated. "Yes," he said firmly. "I've already spoken to a buyer. They're interested, but they want a clean space. No clutter, no storage issues. That's why I cleared out the basement." "Yes," he said firmly. "I've already spoken to a buyer. They're interested, but they want a clean space. No clutter, no storage issues. That's why I cleared out the basement." I stared at him, the pieces finally coming together. "You didn't just throw them away because they were old. I said slowly. You threw them away because they were inconvenient. That's not fair, he snapped. No, what's not fair? I replied, my voice shaking now. Is you deciding that something that mattered to me didn't matter at all. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Mom, I'm trying to help you, he said. You can't stay here forever. This house is too much, and honestly, you need to let go of things. I let out a bitter laugh. Let go, I repeated. Is that what you think this is about? What else would it be about? He shot back. I opened my mouth to answer, but stopped. Because for a moment, I saw it clearly. He didn't know. Not really. To him, those boxes were just old files, paper, weight, something to be removed so life could move forward. He didn't see Gregory Hale. He didn't see the missing page. He didn't see Michael Torres's statement buried where no one would find it. He didn't see the quiet fear I had lived with for decades, the question I never answered. He didn't see the possibility that someone had been condemned unfairly. To him, none of that existed. And maybe that was my fault, because I had never told him. I had never trusted him with that part of me. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to steady. Daniel, I said softer now. Those weren't just papers. They were records from a case I worked on, a case that wasn't right. He looked at me skeptical, but listening. Every case has issues, he said. That doesn't mean anything. This one did, I insisted. There were inconsistencies, missing documents, a witness whose statement didn't match the outcome. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. And you're telling me you held on to that for 40 years. This one did, I insisted. There were inconsistencies, missing documents, a witness whose statement didn't match the outcome. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. And you're telling me you held on to that for 40 years? Yes. Why didn't you do something about it back then? The question hit harder than I expected, because it was the same question I had asked myself over and over again. I was afraid, I admitted. Of what? Of being wrong. Of stepping out of line. Of consequences I didn't understand. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, and for the first time that morning, I saw something shift in his expression. Not agreement, but curiosity. And now he asked. I swallowed. Now I think I made a mistake. I said, not because I kept the files, but because I didn't act on them. He was quiet. And you think those papers would have changed something? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know they deserve to be seen. And now they're gone, he said flatly. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, they are. But even as I said the words, something inside me resisted. Because they weren't gone. Not entirely. Not if my memory was right. I turned away from him, walking slowly to the window, my mind racing. State Archives. Illinois State Archives. The thought kept repeating itself louder now. You said you talked to a buyer, I asked, suddenly still facing the window. Yeah, Daniel said. Why? When are they coming to see the house? In a few days? Why? I nodded to myself, barely hearing him. Then we still have time. For what? He asked. I turned back to him, and this time there was something new in my voice. Not anger, not grief, something sharper. I need to go to Springfield, I said. He blinked. Springfield. For what? For the truth, I replied. He stared at me like I had just lost my mind. Mom, you're not seriously, I am, I cut in. Over some old case, he said, disbelief creeping into his voice. Yes, even if those files exist, he argued, what are you going to do with them? Walk into a courthouse and reopen something from 40 years ago? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know I have to try. He shook his head, standing up now. This is exactly what I mean, he said. You're chasing something that doesn't affect your life anymore. It does affect my life, I said quietly. How? I met his eyes. Because I've been living with it for 40 years. That stopped him, just for a second, but it was enough. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Gregory Hale anymore. This wasn't just about missing files or lost evidence. This was about me, about the version of myself I had buried along with those papers. The woman who had seen something wrong and stayed silent. The woman who had chosen safety over truth. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change that. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping. You're serious, he said. Yes. And you're going to do this no matter what I say, I nodded. Yes. He looked away, shaking his head again, but this time there was less frustration in it, more confusion, more uncertainty. Fine, he muttered. Do whatever you want. I didn't respond, because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was already moving forward. And somewhere in a building filled with forgotten stories, the truth was still waiting for me. I left before sunrise. I didn't tell Daniel exactly when I was going. I didn't want another argument, another round of him trying to convince me that I was chasing something meaningless. So I packed quietly, just a small bag, my purse, and a notebook I hadn't used in years. The house felt different as I walked out. Empty. Not because of the missing boxes, but because something between us had shifted. There was a silence now that hadn't been there before. Something unresolved, something waiting. I paused at the front door for a moment, my hand resting on the knob. For years, I had stayed quiet, stayed careful, stayed within the lines drawn for me. But that morning, I stepped outside without asking anyone if I should. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to clarity. The drive to Springfield was longer than I remembered. Or maybe it just felt that way because my mind wouldn't stop moving. Every mile seemed to bring another memory with it. The office, the files, Gregory Hale's name typed in bold letters, the missing page, Michael Torres's statement tucked where no one would look, and then the question that followed me like a shadow. Why didn't you act? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Back then, I had convinced myself that preserving the truth was enough, that if I couldn't change the system, at least I could make sure the truth survived it. But sitting there decades later, I wasn't so sure anymore, because truth that stays hidden isn't really truth at all. It's just silence. By the time I reached Springfield, the sun was already high in the sky, casting long, bright reflections across the government buildings. The Illinois State Archives stood exactly as I remembered, solid, quiet, almost invisible, unless you knew what it held. A place where history didn't disappear. It just waited. I parked the car and sat there for a moment staring at the entrance. This was it. 40 years of doubt leading me to a single door. I stepped out slowly, my legs feeling weaker than I expected, and walked inside. The air was cool still, and faintly smelled of paper and time. It was strange how familiar it felt. A younger version of me had walked through spaces like this every day, believing she was part of something important. I approached the front desk where a young woman looked up and gave me a polite smile. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" I hesitated for just a second. Then I said the words I had been carrying for decades. "I'm looking for a case file. I said. From the early 80s, Gregory Hale. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Do you have a case number, she asked. No, I admitted, but I worked on it. Cook County, Legal Records Division. She nodded, unfazed. Let me see what we have, she said. The seconds that followed felt longer than they should have. I watched her eyes scan the screen, her expression neutral, professional. Then suddenly, something shifted. Yes, she said. We do have records under that name. My breath caught. Are they complete? I asked, my voice barely steady. She glanced back at the screen. It looks like a full archive submission, she said. Transferred in the late 80s. Multiple volumes, full archive. The words echoed in my head. Can I see them? I asked. She smiled again. Of course. I'll just need you to sign a request form. It may take a little while to retrieve everything. I'll wait, I said immediately. She handed me the form, and I filled it out with hands that didn't feel entirely like my own. Name, Albert Morrison. Purpose of request, review archived legal records. I hesitated for a moment before writing the last line. Reason to find the truth. When I handed the form back, she nodded and disappeared into the back. And then there was nothing to do but wait. I sat in one of the chairs near the desk, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Around me, people moved quietly, researchers, students, maybe even historians. Each of them there for their own reasons, their own pieces of the past. But for me, this wasn't just research. This was unfinished business. Minutes passed. Then more. Long enough for doubt to start creeping back in. What if I was wrong? What if the files were incomplete? What if the one thing I needed, the one piece that mattered, wasn't there? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my thoughts. You came this far, I told myself. Don't turn back now. Ms. Morrison. I opened my eyes. The young woman was standing there again, pushing a cart. Not just a small stack. Not just a folder or two. A cart. Filled. Box after box labeled, sealed, preserved. My breath caught in my throat. Here you go, she said gently. Everything we have on Gregory Hale. Everything. I stood up slowly, my eyes fixed on the boxes. 40 years ago, I had watched these records leave the office unsure if they would ever matter. And now, here they were, waiting for me. Take your time, she added. Let me know if you need anything. I nodded, but I barely heard her, because I was already reaching for the first box. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, perfectly organized. Folders, transcripts, evidence logs. And the paper, it wasn't yellowed the way mine had been. It wasn't fragile or fading. It was preserved, protected, untouched. I picked up the first file, my heart beating faster with every second. This wasn't just memory anymore. This was real. This was proof. And somewhere in these pages was the answer I had been carrying for 40 years. I sat down at the table, pulling the first stack toward me. For a moment, I just looked at it. All the hesitation, all the fear, all the years of silence. They had led me here. I took a deep breath. And then I started reading. The first hour passed in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind where every sound, the turning of a page, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the distant footsteps in the hallway, felt louder than it should, as if the room itself was holding its breath with me. I sat at the long wooden table surrounded by boxes that felt far too familiar. Except this time, they weren't mine. They were better, neater, indexed, preserved in a way I had never managed in my basement. Each folder had labels, timestamps, reference numbers. Nothing was faded. Nothing was torn. Nothing had been forgotten. I ran my fingers lightly across the first transcript, almost afraid it would disappear if I touched it too quickly. "This is real," I whispered to myself. And for the first time since Daniel told me he had thrown everything away, I felt something shift. Relief. Not complete, not overwhelming, but enough to let me breathe. I started from the beginning. Case summary, charges filed, initial statements. Gregory Hale. Even seeing his name again made my chest tighten. He had been in his early 40s at the time of the trial. Clean record, businessman, no history of violence. The kind of man who didn't fit the story they had told about him, and yet, convicted. I flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately. I didn't rush, because this time I wasn't just reviewing, I was searching. The timelines appeared again, just like I remembered. Witness 1 saw Hale leaving the building at 9:10 p.m. Witness 2 heard a gunshot at 9:15 p.m. Witness 3 claimed the victim was still alive at 9:20 p.m. I stopped there, my finger resting on the page. "Still wrong," I murmured. 40 years later, and it still didn't make sense. I reached for another folder. Evidence logs, ballistics report, time of death estimate. And then I froze. The time of death had been listed as approximately 9:15 p.m. Approximate, not exact, which meant there had been uncertainty. But the trial transcripts, I remembered, had treated it like fact, like certainty. I leaned back slightly, my heart beginning to beat faster. "They closed the gap," I whispered. That's what they had done. They had taken uncertainty and presented it as truth. I turned another page, then another, faster now, because I knew what I was looking for. Or rather, who? "Michael Torres," I said under my breath. I moved to the next box, my hands no longer steady. This was the part I had never been able to forget. The witness who didn't belong. The statement that had been buried. The truth that didn't match the story. I opened the folder labeled Witness Index. My eyes scanned the names quickly. There, Michael Torres, line 17. My breath caught. "He's here," I whispered. But this time, something was different. There was a reference number next to his name, a file code, a location. My hands trembled as I followed the code, flipping through the folders until I found it. A sealed document, properly labeled, properly stored, not hidden, not erased, just waiting. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it, because this was the moment everything could change, or collapse. I slowly opened the folder. Inside was a full statement, typed, signed, time-stamped. Not a fragment, not a misplaced page. A complete record. My throat tightened as I began to read. Michael Torres state that on the evening in question, I observed an individual exiting the building approximately 5 minutes before the reported gunshot. I stopped. 5 minutes before. That would place the person leaving around 9:10 p.m., the same time Gregory Hale was supposedly seen leaving. But the description. I forced myself to keep reading. The individual was approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a dark overcoat and hat. I did not recognize this individual as Gregory Hale. My hand tightened around the paper. There it was. Clear. Unambiguous. Not Gregory Hale. I exhaled slowly, but it came out shaky. They knew. I whispered. They had known. Not suspected. Not overlooked. Known. Because this statement wasn't incomplete. It wasn't vague. It directly contradicted the prosecution's narrative. And yet, Gregory Hale had still been convicted. I kept reading, my pulse pounding in my ears. I attempted to report this observation to authorities, but was not contacted for further questioning. I closed my eyes. There it was. The silence. Not accidental. Intentional. They ignored him, I said softly. Or worse. I looked down at the signature. Michael Torres. Date. Verified. Filed. Preserved. For 40 years. I sat back slowly, the weight of it pressing down on me. All those years I had carried doubt, a suspicion, a quiet fear that something had been wrong. But this wasn't doubt anymore. This was proof. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. If this statement had been in the official archive, then why hadn't it been used? Why hadn't it been brought up in court? Why had it been left out? There was only one answer that made sense. Because someone didn't want it there. A chill ran through me. Because this wasn't just about a mistake. This was about intention. I reached for the next document in the folder. Internal notes, cross-references, and then something else. A marking, subtle, easy to miss. A small annotation in the margin of a review sheet. Do not include in primary transcript. My breath caught. No, I whispered. I read it again. Clear as day. Not include. Not an error. A decision. My hands began to shake, not with uncertainty, but with something deeper. Anger. Real, sharp anger that had been waiting decades to surface. They buried it, I said louder this time. They buried the truth. I looked around the quiet archive room as if someone might hear me, but no one did, because this moment was mine alone. 40 years ago, I had seen the cracks. I had seen the inconsistencies, but I hadn't had this. I hadn't had proof like this. And now it was sitting right in front of me, unchanged, untouched, unarguable. I pressed my hand flat against the table, trying to steady myself, because suddenly everything felt different. This wasn't just about Gregory Hale anymore. This wasn't just about my past. This was about something that had been hidden on purpose, something that had survived anyway, something that could still... I stopped, because a new thought had just formed. Sharp, immediate, impossible to ignore. If this was here, if the archive had preserved everything, then this wasn't just evidence. This was leverage. I leaned back slowly, my mind moving faster than it had in years. Someone had made a decision. Someone had chosen to hide this statement, which meant someone had something to lose if it was found. And now, it had been found. I looked down at the document again, my fingers tracing the edge of the paper. 40 years ago, I had been afraid to step outside my role, afraid to challenge something bigger than me. But now I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't 38. I wasn't trying to protect a career. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to correct. I closed the folder carefully, but my hands were steady now. Deliberate, focused, because this time I wasn't going to file the truth away. I was going to use it. I didn't realize how long I had been sitting there until the light shifted across the table. The morning brightness had softened into something warmer, stretching shadows across the pages as if time itself was moving around me, reminding me that the world outside hadn't stopped just because mine had. But inside that archive room, everything felt suspended. Because I had crossed a line. Not physically, internally. I wasn't just reviewing records anymore. I was investigating. I leaned forward again, pulling the folder closer, my eyes scanning every word of Michael Torres's statement one more time. This time, I read it differently. Not as a memory, not as confirmation, but as evidence. Precise, intentional, measurable. The kind of thing that could change outcomes. My fingers moved slowly along the margins, tracing the typed lines, then stopping at the annotation again. Do not include in primary transcript. I stared at it, my jaw tightening. That sentence wasn't just a note. It was a decision, a deliberate action taken by someone with authority. And decisions like that always leave a trail. I pushed the folder aside and reached for the internal review documents again. If someone had ordered that exclusion, there had to be documentation, signatures, approvals, routing notes. People rarely erase things cleanly, they just hide them behind process. I flipped through the review sheets one by one. Initial intake, verification stamp, secondary review. Everything looked standard at first glance. Routine, boring even. But I wasn't looking at it the way I used to. Back then, I trusted the system. Now I questioned it. And when you question something, you start noticing what doesn't belong. A missing signature, a delayed timestamp, a document reviewed out of sequence. I paused on one sheet. Review authorization, signed by Thomas Whitaker. My breath caught slightly. Of course, my old supervisor. The man who had told me not to question. The man who had dismissed the inconsistencies without even reading them. I stared at his name for a long moment. It looked exactly the same. Neat, controlled, confident. But now it felt different. Because it wasn't just a signature anymore. It was a connection. I flipped to the next page. Routing notes. And there it was again. Whitaker. Final approval. My pulse began to rise. No, I whispered, though part of me already knew. I turned back to Michael Torres' file, scanning the corner for the routing code. Then I flipped back to the authorization sheet. The codes matched. Exactly, which meant I sat back slowly, my mind putting the pieces together whether I wanted it to or not. Thomas Whitaker had seen the statement. He had reviewed it, and he had approved its exclusion. The room felt colder all of a sudden. Because this wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't someone in the system. This was someone I knew. Someone I had trusted. Someone who had looked me in the eye and told me to stop asking questions. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady the sudden rush of emotion. Anger. Yes. But something else too. Betrayal. Because for years I had blamed myself. For not acting. For not pushing harder. For not speaking up. But now I could see something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I hadn't just been afraid. I had been managed, guided away from the truth. Quietly, professionally, effectively. And it had worked. Until now. I leaned forward again, my movements sharper, more focused. If Whitaker had signed off on this, then there had to be more. No one makes a decision like that alone. Not in a case this large. I pulled another box closer, scanning the labels quickly. Internal correspondence. That was where it would be. Emails didn't exist back then the way they do now, but memos did. Notes. Requests. Instructions passed between departments. I opened the box and began searching. Page after page, memo after memo, routine updates, scheduling notes, filing confirmations. Nothing. I felt frustration building in my chest. Come on, I muttered under my breath. I knew it was here. It had to be. Because decisions like that didn't just appear. They were built, justified, documented. I turned another page, and then I stopped. A memo, different from the others, shorter, marked confidential. My fingers tightened as I lifted it carefully. Dated 3 weeks before the trial concluded. Addressed to Whitaker. From someone higher up. Assistant District Attorney Harold Bennett. I felt my heartbeat quicken. This was it. I started reading. Regarding witness Michael Torres, I didn't breathe. Further pursuit of testimony is not recommended due to inconsistencies with established narrative. The words hit me harder than anything else, because they said everything. This wasn't about truth. This was about story. Focus should remain on primary witnesses to maintain case integrity. Maintain case integrity. Not discover the truth. Not verify the facts. Maintain, protect, control. My hands began to shake again, but this time, I didn't try to stop them. I let the anger rise. Because now, it wasn't just suspicion. It was confirmation. They had chosen the outcome, and then shaped the evidence around it. Gregory Hale hadn't just been unlucky. He had been convenient. I lowered the paper slowly, staring at the table in front of me. 40 years. 40 years this had existed. Quietly sitting in a box, waiting for someone to care enough to look. And no one had. Not until now. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then I opened them again. Different. Clearer. Because something inside me had changed. Before I had been driven by regret. By the feeling that I had failed to act. But now I was driven by something else. Purpose. I gathered the key documents carefully. Michael Torres' statement. The authorization sheet. Whitaker's signature. Bennett's memo. Piece by piece. Proof by proof. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a case, and cases could be reopened. I sat there for a moment, staring at the stack in front of me. Then another thought crept in. Practical, immediate, necessary. I can't do this alone, I said quietly. Because I couldn't. Not anymore. Not at this scale. This wasn't something you just handed to a clerk or mailed to a court. This needed attention, visibility, pressure. And suddenly, I remembered something from the outline of my own past. The one thing I hadn't considered until now. Journalists. They were the ones who asked questions when systems didn't want answers. They were the ones who brought buried truths into the light. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands hovered over the screen for a moment, because this was another line, another step I hadn't taken before. But this time, I didn't hesitate long. I searched for local investigative reporters. Names appeared, articles, bylines, stories of corruption uncovered, mistakes exposed. One name stood out. Ryan Mitchell, young, persistent, known for digging into old cases. I clicked on one of his articles, then another. He didn't just report, he questioned exactly what I needed. I hesitated for just a second, then tapped the contact link. My fingers moved slowly at first. then faster. Mr. Mitchell, I typed, "My name is Albert Morrison. I believe I have evidence that could reopen a wrongful conviction from 1983. I paused, staring at the words. This was real now. No going back. I finished the message, added a few key details, and then I pressed send. The screen went still. No immediate response, just silence. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence that buried truth. It was the kind that came right before something changed. I looked down at the documents again, my heart steady now. Because for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't just holding the truth. I was setting it in motion. I didn't expect a reply that quickly. I had just set my phone down beside the stack of documents, my mind still racing through everything I had uncovered when it buzzed against the wooden table, sharp, sudden, almost jarring in the quiet room. For a second, I just stared at it. My heart began to beat faster again, but this time, it wasn't from memory. It was from what came next. I picked it up. One new message, from Ryan Mitchell. I opened it immediately. Ms. Morrison, if what you're saying is accurate, this is significant. Are you still at the archives? I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath. He believed me, or at least he was willing to listen. Yes, I typed back. I'm here. I have the documents. The reply came almost instantly. Don't leave. I'm about an hour away. I lowered the phone, my fingers still wrapped around it. An hour. That was all it would take for this to move beyond me, beyond my memory, beyond my silence. I looked down at the papers again, my mind shifting into something sharper, more deliberate. If Ryan was coming, I needed to be ready. Not emotional, not uncertain, clear. Because this wasn't just a story anymore. This was evidence. And evidence had to be presented carefully. I began organizing the documents on the table. Michael Torres's statement went first, then the authorization sheet with Whitaker's signature, then Bennett's memo. I lined them up in order, not the order I had found them, but the order that told the story. The real story. Discovery. Suppression. Decision. Consequence. It felt strange doing this, like I was stepping into a role I had never fully allowed myself to take. Not just a records analyst, not just a witness, but something closer to an advocate. I sat back slightly, reviewing everything again. The narrative was clear, too clear. And that was what made it dangerous. Because simple truths are the hardest to hide once they're seen. I glanced around the room, suddenly more aware of my surroundings. People were still moving quietly between tables. A man in the corner flipping through newspapers. A woman typing notes into her laptop. No one was paying attention to me. But for the first time, I wondered if that would change. Because if this was as big as it felt, then someone somewhere might not want it uncovered. I pushed that thought aside. Fear had already cost me 40 years. I wasn't going to let it take anything else. The hour passed faster than I expected, partly because I kept rereading the documents, partly because my mind wouldn't stop anticipating the next step. And then I saw him. He walked in with purpose, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark jacket sleeves, slightly rolled eyes, scanning the room like he was already looking for a story before he even found it. Ryan Mitchell. He spotted me almost immediately. Or maybe he recognized the way I was sitting, surrounded by documents waiting. He approached the table, slowing just enough to be respectful. Ms. Morrison? He asked. I nodded. Yes. He pulled out the chair across from me. I'm Ryan, he said, though I already knew. I know, I replied softly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He glanced at the papers, then back at me. You said you have evidence, he said carefully. I nodded again. I do? He leaned forward slightly. Then show me. There was no hesitation in his voice. No skepticism. Just focus. I slid the first document toward him. Michael Torres's statement. He picked it up, his eyes moving quickly across the page. At first, his expression was neutral, professional, but then it changed. His brow tightened, his eyes slowed. He went back and reread a line, then another. This contradicts the prosecution, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. He looked up at me, and it was never presented. No. He stared at me for a second longer, then reached for the next document, Whitaker's authorization. I watched his reaction carefully this time, because I needed to see it, needed to know if I wasn't the only one who felt the weight of it. He read it once, then again, then leaned back slightly, exhaling. Someone signed off on excluding this, he said. Yes. Your supervisor? Yes. His jaw tightened. Then he picked up the final document, Bennett's memo. This time he read slower, deliberately. When he reached the line, maintain case integrity, he stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked up at me again. This isn't just negligence, he said. I shook my head. No, I said quietly, it isn't. He placed the papers down, carefully aligning them as if they were more than just documents. Because now they were. They controlled the narrative, he said. Yes. They buried contradictory evidence. Yes. And a man was convicted anyway. I held his gaze. Yes. The silence that followed felt different than before. Not heavy, not uncertain, focused. This could reopen the case, he said finally. My chest tightened slightly at the words. Do you think so? I asked. He nodded slowly. With the right legal push, yes. But more importantly, he paused, tapping the papers lightly. This could expose something bigger. Bigger? I echoed. He leaned forward again. Patterns, he said. If this happened once, it might have happened more than once. Same people, same system, same decisions. A chill ran through me, because that possibility hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I had been so focused on Gregory Hale, on one case, one mistake. But Ryan was looking at something else entirely. A pattern, a system. I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap. Then we need to be careful, I said. He gave a small, serious nod. He glanced around briefly, then back at me. Who else knows you're here? No one, I said. I didn't tell my son exactly where I was going. He studied me for a moment. Good, he said quietly. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten again. Not fear, but awareness. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was becoming public. And public truths have consequences. Ryan gathered the documents again, looking at them like someone who understood exactly what they were worth. Can I take copies? He asked. Yes, I said immediately, but the originals stay here. Of course, he said. He stood up slightly, then paused. Ms. Morrison, he said, his voice softer now. Why didn't you come forward before? The question hit me just like Daniel's had. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I was afraid, I said. He nodded as if he expected that answer. And now I looked down at the papers, then back at him. I'm not anymore. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. Good, he said. Because this is going to get complicated, I believed him. Completely. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about what happens after the truth is found. And something told me that part would be even harder. We didn't leave the archives right away. Ryan insisted on making copies on site, scanning every document carefully, methodically, as if each page carried the weight of something fragile and irreversible. I watched him work from across the table. There was something reassuring about his focus. He didn't rush, didn't treat this like just another story. Every time he placed a document under the scanner, he adjusted it precisely, making sure no edge was cut off, no word lost. This is how things disappear, he said quietly at one point without looking up. Not because someone burns them, but because someone stops paying attention. I nodded slowly. I know, and I did, because for 40 years, that's exactly what had happened. The truth hadn't been destroyed. It had been ignored. When he finished, he carefully saved everything onto his laptop, then backed it up again onto a small external drive. Redundancy, he explained briefly. We don't take chances with something like this. Something like this. The phrase lingered in my mind, because even now part of me was still adjusting to the idea that what I had carried for decades quietly, privately, was something bigger than I had allowed myself to believe. Ryan closed his laptop and finally leaned back. Okay, he said. Next step. I felt my chest tighten slightly. What happens now? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the documents again, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. We verify everything he said. Then we build a timeline. Then we start asking questions. Instead, he studied the documents again, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. We verify everything he said. Then we build a timeline. Then we start asking questions. Questions to who, I asked. To anyone still connected to this, he replied. Prosecutors, retired officials, maybe even the judge if he's still alive. And Gregory Hale, I asked quietly. Ryan looked at me. That's the most important part, he said. We need to know where he is. I hadn't thought that far ahead. For all the years I had carried his name, I had never actually imagined finding him. Because in my mind, he had always been frozen in time. A defendant in a file, a face in a black and white photograph. But now, he was real again. A person. Somewhere. What if I hesitated, the thought catching in my throat? What if he's still in prison? Ryan didn't soften the answer. Then we get him out. The certainty in his voice made something inside me shift again. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about correcting the past. It was about changing the present. Ryan gathered his things, then looked at me again. You should go home, he said. I'll start working on this tonight. I hesitated. I don't feel like I should just leave it, I admitted. You're not leaving it, he said. You've already done the hardest part. I shook my head slightly. No, I said quietly. The hardest part was waiting 40 years. He didn't argue with that. Instead, he nodded once. Fair enough. Instead, he nodded once. Fair enough. We walked out of the archives together. The late afternoon air felt different when we stepped outside. Louder, brighter. Like the world had shifted slightly while we were inside. Ryan stopped Ped near the parking lot. I'll call you. We walked out of the archives together. The late afternoon air felt different when we stepped outside. Louder, brighter. Like the world had shifted slightly while we were inside. Ryan stopped near the parking lot. I'll call you, he said. Probably soon. I nodded. Okay. He hesitated for a moment, then added, and Ms. Morrison, be careful who you talk to about this. I felt a slight chill. I understand. He gave me a final nod, then walked away, already pulling out his phone, already moving into whatever came next. I stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the distance. Then I turned toward my car. The drive home felt different from the drive there. Before, my mind had been filled with questions. Now it was filled with consequences, because something had started, something that couldn't be undone. And something told me it wouldn't stay quiet for long. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was already setting. The house looked the same, still, familiar. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange sense of distance from it, like I had crossed into something else and couldn't fully return. I opened the front door. Daniel was in the living room, watching TV, the volume low. He looked up as I walked in. You're back, he said. Yes. There was a pause. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked. I set my bag down slowly. Yes, I said. He muted the TV, giving me his full attention now, and he pressed. I met his eyes. They still exist, I said. Every document, every page. He frowned slightly. At the archives? Yes. He leaned back, processing that. So what now? He asked. I hesitated, because this was the moment where I could either keep it small or tell the truth fully. I met with a reporter, I said. His expression changed immediately. A reporter, he repeated. Yes. Mom, why would you? Because this isn't just about me, I interrupted gently. He stood up now, frustration creeping into his voice. You're turning this into something public. It already is public, I said. It's just been hidden. He shook his head. You don't even know what you're getting into, he said. Maybe not, I admitted, but I know what I've been living with. That doesn't mean you go to the media, he argued. There are lawyers, there were, I said softly. 40 years ago. That stopped him. For a second, but only a second. And now you think you can fix it, he said. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know. But I knew I had to try. I think I can't ignore it anymore, I said finally. He let out a frustrated breath, running his hands through his hair. This is going to blow up, he said. You realize that, right? Yes. And you're okay with that? I looked at him. Really looked at him. My son. The boy who thought he was protecting me by simplifying my life, by removing what he didn't understand. I'm not okay with what happened, I said quietly. That's the problem. He didn't respond. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the same silence as before, because now something had shifted between us too. He didn't fully understand what I was doing, but for the first time, he couldn't dismiss it either. I'm going to my room, I said. He nodded, still standing there, still processing. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me, not with frustration, not completely, but with something new, uncertainty, maybe even doubt. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized something important. This wasn't just changing the past. It was changing the present. My life. My son. Everything. And somewhere beyond this house. The truth was already beginning to move. The call came the next morning. I hadn't slept much, Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the documents again. The memo, the annotation, the signature. 40 years of silence undone in a single day. So when my phone rang just after 7 a.m., I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Ryan's name lit up the screen. I answered immediately. "Hello, Ms. Morrison," he said, his voice sharper than the day before, more urgent. "We have a problem." My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of problem? There was a pause. The kind that means someone else knows, he said. A chill ran through me. Knows what I asked, though I already understood. About the documents. About the case. About you. I stood up slowly, my heart beginning to beat faster. How I whispered. "I started making calls last night," he said. "Quiet ones, just to confirm records, cross-check names, nothing public. But this morning, I got a call back." "From who?" "A retired clerk," he said. "Used to work under Whitaker." She didn't want to talk at first. Said the case was closed business. But then she asked me something strange. What did she ask? Ryan exhaled slowly. She asked if I had spoken to you yet. My stomach dropped. She knew my name. I asked. Yes. I felt the room tilt slightly, as if something invisible had shifted beneath me. "That's not possible," I said. "No one knew I was looking into this, not even Daniel." "I believe you," Ryan said. "But someone connected the dots. Maybe from the archive request. Maybe from internal logs. I don't know yet." I pressed my hand against the table, steadying myself. "What did she say after that?" I asked. "She told me to be careful," he said. Then she hung up. Silence filled the space between us. Not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that carries warning. "Ryan," I said slowly, "what exactly are we dealing with?" Another pause. Then, something bigger than a single case. I closed my eyes briefly, because I had felt it yesterday. The scale of it, the weight. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a different way. "Do you think they're watching?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think they're paying attention." I looked around the kitchen instinctively. Everything seemed normal. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet. But suddenly, "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think they're paying attention." I looked around the kitchen instinctively. Everything seemed normal. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet. But suddenly, it didn't feel the same. "What should I do?" I asked. "For now," he said. "Nothing different. Don't panic. Don't talk to anyone else about this. And if anything feels off, call me immediately." "Okay," I said. "And Ms. Morrison," he added, his tone softer. "Now this is where most people stop." I knew what he meant. Fear, pressure, doubt. All the things that had stopped me before. "I'm not most people anymore," I said quietly. He didn't respond right away. "Then, I believe you," he said. We ended the call shortly after, but the silence that followed felt louder than anything he had said. I stood there in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then I moved, not because I knew what to do, but because standing still suddenly felt wrong. I walked through the house slowly. Living room, hallway, back toward the stairs. Everything looked exactly the same. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. The faint creak of the floorboards. The way the light shifted across the walls. The sound of a car passing outside. Small details, ordinary details. But my mind was no longer ordinary, because now every detail felt like a possibility, a question, a risk. Don't panic, I repeated to myself softly. But it wasn't panic. It was awareness. And once you become aware, you can't go back. A noise upstairs pulled me from my thoughts. Daniel. He was awake. I hesitated for a moment. Then I walked toward the stairs. Because hiding now didn't make sense. I found him in his room, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a brief pause. "You're up early?" he added. "So are you," I replied. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep much. Neither could I." I stepped further into the room, watching him for a moment. There was something different about him, too. Less certainty, less control. As if the shift I felt had reached him as well. "Daniel," I said, "can we talk?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah." I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "I think this is bigger than I thought." He frowned slightly. "The case..." "Yes." "How much bigger?" he asked. I hesitated. "Big enough that someone else already knows we're looking into it." His expression changed immediately. "What do you mean?" I told him. "Not everything, but enough. The phone call, the retired clerk, the warning." He listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he didn't dismiss it. He didn't argue. He just sat there quiet. "That's not good," he said finally. "No," I agreed. Another pause. "Then, Mom, are you in danger?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't thought it, but because hearing it out loud made it real. "I don't know," I said honestly. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly unsettled. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Neither do they," I replied. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no frustration in his eyes, just concern. "Maybe you should stop," he said quietly. The words hung between us. Because this was the moment. The same kind of moment I had faced 40 years ago. The point where fear becomes a choice. I took a slow breath, then shook my head. "No," I said. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he had expected that answer, but hoped for something else. "Then I'm not letting you do this alone," he said. I blinked. "What?" "I'm serious," he said. "If this is as big as you think it is, then you need someone watching your back." I studied him for a moment. My son. The same man who had thrown away my past, now standing in front of me, ready to protect my future. "You don't even believe in this," I said softly. "I believe in you," he replied. The words hit harder than anything else that morning, because for the first time, we were standing on the same side. Not because he understood everything, but because he understood enough. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. And just like that, something shifted again. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And somewhere beyond this house, beyond the archive, beyond the years of silence, the truth was no longer hidden. It was being watched. The knock came 2 days later. It wasn't loud, not aggressive, just deliberate, the kind of knock that assumes you'll answer. I was in the kitchen again when it happened, standing by the sink, staring out the window without really seeing anything. Daniel had gone out earlier, saying he needed to run errands, though I knew he was probably just trying to clear his head. We both were. The silence in the house had changed over the past 48 hours. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful. I dried my hands slowly, my eyes drifting toward the front door. Another knock. Same rhythm. Measured. I walked toward it, my steps steady, even though something deep inside me had already started to tighten. I didn't ask who it was. I to tighten. I didn't ask who it was. I just opened the door. A man stood there, mid-50s, gray at the temples, clean-cut, composed, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive without trying to. He smiled, not warmly, politely. Mrs. Morrison just opened the door. A man stood there, mid-50s, gray at the temples, clean-cut, composed, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive without trying to. He smiled. Not warmly, politely. "Mrs. Morrison?" he asked. I didn't return the smile. "Yes." He nodded once. "My name is Richard Bennett." The name hit me instantly. Bennett. My stomach dropped, but I didn't let it show. "Is there something I can help you with?" I asked. He glanced briefly past me, as if taking in the house without actually turning his head. "May I come in?" he asked. "No," I said. The answer came faster than I expected. His smile didn't fade, but something behind it shifted. "I understand," he said calmly. "Then, you'll keep this brief." Good, I thought, because I had no intention of letting him inside. He folded his hands lightly in front of him. "I believe you've recently taken an interest in a case from 1983, he said. There it was. No pretense, no denial, just confirmation. "Yes," I said. "And I believe you've also shared certain materials with a journalist," he continued. I held his gaze. "Yes." He nodded again, as if checking something off an invisible list. "I'd like to advise you to reconsider your involvement," he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I had expected and feared. "Advise," I repeated. "Yes," he said smoothly. "Sometimes revisiting the past can create complications." "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer that directly. "Cases like this were handled within the standards of their time," he said instead. "What you're interpreting as wrongdoing may simply be procedural context you're unfamiliar with." I felt something rise in my chest. Not fear. Not this time. Clarity. "I worked on that case," I said. "I know exactly what I'm looking at." His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Then you should also understand the importance of closure. I worked on that case," I said. "I know exactly what I'm looking at." His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Then you should also understand the importance of closure," he said. "Closure," I echoed. "Yes," he said, "for everyone involved." I took a step forward, just enough to make the distance between us feel intentional. "Gregory Hale didn't get closure," I said quietly. For the first time, there was a pause in his response. Small, but real. "That's not a matter for you to resolve," he said finally. "It became a matter for me the moment I saw what was hidden," I replied. His gaze held mine for a long second. Then he exhaled softly. "You're putting yourself in a difficult position, Mrs. Morrison," he said. "I've been in a difficult position for 40 years, I said. Another silence, this one heavier, because now we both understood what this conversation really was. Not advice, a warning. Things have a way of escalating once they become public, he said carefully. I'm counting on it, I replied. That caught him off guard. Just for a second. But I saw it. The slight shift in his posture. The recalibration. Then I'll be direct, he said. Finally. The people connected to that case, they're not interested in reopening it. I'm not asking for permission, I said. His jaw tightened slightly. Permission isn't always the issue, he said. No, I agreed. Truth is, that was the moment the polite mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. Because now he wasn't speaking as a visitor. He was speaking as someone with something to protect. You think you found something significant, he said. I know I have, I replied. You found a fragment, he corrected, out of context, without understanding the full picture. I felt the anger rise again, but this time it didn't shake me. It steadied me. Then why are you here? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Because he couldn't, and we both knew it. If this wasn't important, you wouldn't be standing on my porch. That landed. I saw it in his eyes. A flicker, a crack. But it disappeared just as quickly. He straightened, slightly regaining control. I came here as a courtesy, he said. No, I said softly. You came here because you're worried. Silence. Real silence this time. Not strategic, not controlled. Just silence. Then he nodded once, very slightly. Be careful, Mrs. Morrison, he said. There are things you don't understand. I held his gaze. Then maybe it's time someone did. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped back. Just one step. But it was enough. This isn't over, he said. I know, I replied. He gave a final restrained nod, then turned and walked away. I stood in the doorway watching him until he reached his car and drove off. Only then did I close the door. My hands were steady, my breathing even. But inside, everything had shifted. Because this was no longer theoretical, no longer quiet, no longer hidden. They had come to my house. They had tried to stop me, which meant one thing. I was right. I walked back into the kitchen slowly, my mind already moving. They weren't going to wait. They weren't going to stay passive, and neither could I. I reached for my phone and called Ryan. He answered on the second ring. Yeah, they came to my house, I said. A pause. Then who Bennett? I said. Harold Bennett's son. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, I said. But they're not hiding anymore. I could hear him moving on the other end papers, maybe his laptop. Good, he said finally. Good, I repeated. Yes, he said, because that means we push now. I leaned against the counter, my heart steady. What are you thinking I'm publishing the first piece? He said. Today. Today. The word echoed through me. This is going public, I asked. It already is, he said. We just haven't told anyone yet. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again. Ready. Do it, I said. And just like that, there was no turning back. The article went live at 2:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because Ryan texted me the link the second it was published. It's out. Just 2 words. But they carried more weight than anything I had read in years. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Because once I read it, once the world read it, everything would change. Mom Daniel's voice pulled me back. He was standing in the doorway watching me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "It's happening," I said. What as I turned the phone toward him? The story. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the screen. "Already?" he asked. "Yes." He hesitated. "Are you going to read it?" I took a breath, then tapped the link. The page loaded quickly. A clean headline. Direct. Unapologetic. Buried evidence in 1983. Conviction raises questions of prosecutorial misconduct. My name was there, not in the headline, but just below it. Albert Morrison, former records analyst. Source. My chest tightened as I started reading. Ryan had done exactly what he promised. He didn't dramatize. He didn't exaggerate. He laid out the fact. Michael Torres's statement, the annotation, the memo from Bennett, the decision to exclude. Each piece presented clearly, carefully, unavoidably. And then he asked the question, the one no one had asked in 40 years, question. The one no one had asked in 40 years. If this evidence existed at the time of trial, why was it never presented? I stopped reading. Because that question was everything. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. "Wow," he murmured. "Yeah," I said quietly. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then my phone buzzed, and then again, and again. I looked down. Notifications, messages, calls, unknown numbers, emails. The story wasn't just live. It was spreading. Fast. "Okay," Daniel said slowly. "That's a lot." I nodded. "This is what he meant," I said. "What?" he asked. "When he said it would escalate." I barely had time to process it before the phone rang. "Ryan." I answered immediately. "It's moving," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. I can see that I replied. "They picked it up," he added. "Who local first? Now state-level outlets are starting to reference it." I leaned against the counter, my heart steady, but heavy. "And Bennett?" I asked. There was a pause. "No official response yet," he said. "But that won't last." "I spoke to his son yesterday," I said. "I know," Ryan replied. That stopped me. "What do you mean, you know?" "He called me," Ryan said. A chill ran through me. "When?" "Right after he left your house," Ryan said. Tried to frame it as a professional conversation. And he wanted to know what I had, Ryan said. I told him it was already being prepared for publication. I exhaled slowly. "So he knew?" "Yes, and he still came here," I said. "To see if he could stop you?" Ryan replied. I nodded then though he couldn't see me. He canned him, it was already being prepared for publication. I exhaled slowly. "So he knew?" "Yes. And he still came here," I said. "To see if he could stop you?" Ryan replied. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "He can't," I said. "I don't think he believes that yet," Ryan said. "Well, he will," I replied. There was a brief pause. "Then I've also made another call," Ryan added. "What kind of call?" "To Gregory Hale." My breath caught. "You found him?" I asked. "Yes." "And he's alive," Ryan said. I closed my eyes for a second. Alive, after 40 years. Alive, where is he, I asked. Still in prison, Ryan said, quietly. The words hit harder than anything else. Still, after everything we had found, after everything we now knew. Still, I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the weight of it settle. Does he know I asked? I told him a story was coming out, Ryan said. Didn't go into detail yet. What did he say? Another pause. He didn't believe me at first, Ryan said. Then he asked one question. What? Why now? The simplicity of it broke something inside me. Because it was fair. More than fair. 40 years of silence, and now suddenly the truth. Tell him I hesitated, my voice catching slightly. Tell him someone finally looked. Ryan didn't respond right away. Then I will, he said. We ended the call shortly after, but the room didn't feel the same anymore. Because now, this wasn't just about exposure. This was about a man, a real man, still sitting in a cell, waiting. For something he had probably stopped expecting a long time ago. Daniel was watching me closely. What did he say, he asked. I swallowed. They found him, and he's still in prison. Daniel's expression changed instantly. That's unbelievable, he said. Yes, I said softly. It is. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. So what happens now? He asked. I looked down at the phone again, at the article, at the messages. At now, I said. Now people start asking questions. And after that, I met his eyes. After that, they'll have to answer. He didn't look convinced. Or they'll try to shut it down, he said. Yes, I agreed. And if they do, I took a slow breath. Then we keep going. He stopped pacing, studying me for a moment. You're serious, he said. I've never been more serious. Another silence. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Then we do it right. I repeated. He gave a small, determined nod. Something inside me softened at that. Because for the first time, I wasn't carrying this alone. Not anymore. The phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another message. The story was spreading faster than either of us could track. And somewhere, in a prison cell I had never seen, a man was about to learn that his story had finally been heard. I looked at the headline one more time, then closed the screen. Because this wasn't the end. Not even close. This was just the beginning. The second article came 3 days later. This time, it wasn't just Ryan. It was everywhere. Local news. State outlets. Even a national legal journal picked it up with a headline that made my stomach tighten the moment I saw it. Suppressed evidence in 1983. Case sparks statewide review demands statewide. Not local anymore. Not contained. I sat in the living room, the television on volume low, watching my own past unfold in headlines and interviews. Daniel stood behind me, arms crossed, reading updates from his phone. They're calling for an inquiry, he said. I nodded slowly. I know. They're naming Whitaker, he added. That made me look up. Specifically, yes, he said. They're asking for records of every case he reviewed between 1980 and 1990. A wave of something unfamiliar washed over me. Not relief. Not yet. but something close to validation. Because for decades that name had lived quietly in my memory. And now it was being spoken out loud. Publicly. Ryan moved fast, I said. Daniel let out a quiet breath. Ryan didn't do this alone, he said. He turned his phone toward me. More reporters, more analysts, more voices joining in, each one adding pressure, each one asking the same question. What else was hidden? The phone rang again. Ryan, I answered immediately. You're watching, he asked. Yes. Good, he said, because it's about to get louder. How much louder, I asked. They're setting a preliminary hearing, he said. My heart skipped. A hearing? Yes, he said. Not a full retrial yet, but enough to review the new evidence officially. I stood up slowly. When? Within the week, he said. That fast. After 40 years of silence, everything was accelerating. And Gregory? I asked. He knows, Ryan said. I closed my eyes briefly. How did he take it? Another pause. Carefully, Ryan said. He's been disappointed before. That made sense. Too much sense. But he agreed to appear. I asked. Yes. That word carried weight. More than anything else so far. Because this wasn't just about documents anymore. It was about a man walking into a room and asking the system to look at him again. I sat back down slowly. I want to be there, I said. Ryan didn't hesitate. You should be, he said. I have to be. I corrected, because I did. Not as a witness, not as a source, but as the person who had stayed silent when it mattered most. I'll send you the details, he said. We ended the call, and I sat there for a moment, letting it all settle. A hearing, a real one, not a memory, not a file, reality. Daniel stepped closer. You're going, he asked. Yes. He nodded. I'm coming with you. I looked up at him. You don't have to, I said. I know, he replied, but I am. There was no argument in his voice this time, no hesitation, just certainty, and I realized something in that moment. He wasn't trying to protect me from this anymore. He was standing with me in it. Okay, I said. The days leading up to the hearing moved quickly, but each moment felt stretched. Every call mattered. Every update shifted something. Ryan kept me informed, lawyers getting involved, advocacy groups raising questions, even former colleagues of mine beginning to speak out anonymously. Anonymous. That word stayed with me. Because for so long, that had been me. Hidden, quiet, safe. And now, I wasn't. The morning of the hearing arrived sooner than I expected. The courthouse stood exactly as I remembered it. Tall, imposing, unchanged. Time had passed, but the building hadn't aged in the same way people did. Daniel parked the car, and for a moment, neither of us moved. You ready? He asked. I looked at the entrance, at the steps, at the doors that led inside. No, but that didn't matter. Yes, I said. We stepped out together. The air felt heavier here, charged, because this wasn't just a legal space anymore. It was a place where something buried was about to be unearthed. Reporters stood near the entrance. Cameras, microphones, voices. Ryan was already there. He spotted me immediately and walked over. You made it, he said. I said I would. He nodded. Good. Stay close to me when we go in. Daniel stepped forward slightly. I'll stay with her, he said. Ryan gave him a quick look, then nodded. All right. We moved toward the entrance together. The cameras turned, voices rose. Ms. Morrison, is it true you found the documents? Do you believe the conviction will be overturned? We moved toward the entrance together. The cameras turned. Voices rose. Ms. Morrison, is it true you found the documents? Do you believe the conviction will be overturned? Do you think this is part of a larger pattern? The questions came fast. Too fast. I didn't answer. Not yet. Ryan guided us through past the noise into the building. Inside. It was quieter, but not calm. The courtroom was already filling. Lawyers, observers, reporters taking notes. And then I saw him, Gregory Hale. He sat at the defense table, older than I expected, but not in the way that time softens people. Time had carved into him, sharpened him. His posture was straight, but there was a weight in it, a lifetime of waiting, a lifetime of being unheard. I stopped walking. Daniel touched my arm gently. Mom, that's him, I said. Ryan followed my gaze. Yes, he said quietly. Gregory looked up. Not at me, not at anyone specific, just up. Taking in the room, the moment, the reality of it. And for a second, our eyes met. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. Why would he? To him, I was just another face in the room, another observer, another stranger. But to me, he was everything this had been about. I felt my chest tighten, not with guilt, not anymore, but with something deeper, responsibility. Because this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about what that truth meant for him. The judge entered. The room stood, and just like that, it began. The hearing was formal, structured, but beneath it, there was tension. Because everyone in that room knew something unusual was happening. Evidence was presented, Ryan's article referenced, the documents introduced, and then Michael Torres's statement. Read aloud, word by word. Clear? Unavoidable. The courtroom shifted. You could feel it, the weight of it settling into every corner. Then the memo. Bennett's words. Maintain case integrity. I saw the reaction this time, not just from the audience, but from the bench. Subtle, but real. Because now it wasn't just a story. It was evidence, officially, on record, and for the first time in 40 years. The truth wasn't hidden in a file. It was being heard, out loud. The room didn't feel the same after the documents were read. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was recognition, like something long ignored had finally stepped into the light, and no one in that courtroom could pretend they didn't see it. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my eyes fixed ahead, but my mind was moving fast, catching every shift, every reaction. The prosecution team looked different now, less confident, less certain. Their whispers were quieter, more urgent, because they understood what had just happened. The narrative had changed, not completely, not officially, but enough. Gregory's attorney stood next. A woman in her early 40s, sharp composed with a presence that filled the room without needing volume. Your Honor, she began, what we have just heard is not simply newly discovered evidence. It is evidence that existed at the time of trial and was deliberately excluded. Deliberately. The word landed heavily, because that was the difference between mistake and choice. She continued, her voice steady. This is not a request for reconsideration based on technicality. This is a request for justice based on omission, an omission that directly impacted the outcome of this case. I glanced at Gregory. He wasn't looking at the attorney. He was looking straight ahead, still, focused. But there was something in his expression now that hadn't been there before. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it, awareness. The judge leaned forward slightly. Counsel, He said the court recognizes the seriousness of these claims. However, the state will have an opportunity to respond. Of course they would. And they did. The prosecutor stood. Older than I expected. Measured. Careful. Your Honor, he said while the documents presented raise questions they do not in themselves establish misconduct. There it was. The pushback. Expected. Predictable. But still frustrating. These materials require context, he continued. We must consider the standards, procedures, and legal frameworks of the time. I felt a familiar tension rise in my chest. Context. Procedure. Framework. Different words. Same excuse. Gregory's attorney didn't react outwardly, but I saw it in the way she straightened slightly. Preparing. The defense would argue, she replied, that no context justifies the suppression of evidence that contradicts the prosecution's case. The judge raised a hand slightly. Enough, he said. The room fell quiet again. Because now, it came down to him. He looked down at the documents in front of him, then back up. This court acknowledges the potential significance of the materials presented, he said. However, before any determination can be made regarding the conviction itself, further review is required. My heart tightened. Further review. Not a decision, not yet, but not a dismissal either. A formal investigation will be initiated into the handling of evidence in this case, he continued. All relevant records from the original proceedings will be requested and examined. A ripple moved through the room. Because that was it. The door, not fully open, but no longer closed. Gregory's attorney nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge turned slightly. In the meantime, he added, this court will schedule a follow-up hearing to determine whether sufficient grounds exist to vacate the conviction. Vacate. The word echoed through me, because for 40 years that conviction had been permanent, untouchable, and now it wasn't. The hearing adjourned shortly after. People began to stand, voices rising again, movement returning to the room. But I stayed seated for a moment longer. Because I needed to feel it. Not the noise, not the attention, but the shift. Something had changed. Not completely, but enough. Mom Daniel said softly beside me. I looked up. He was watching beside me. I looked up. He was watching on me closely. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, and for the first time I meant it. Ryan approached us a moment later. That went better than expected, he said. Better nung me closely. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, and for the first time I meant it. Ryan approached us a moment later. That went better than expected, he said. Better, Daniel repeated. Ryan gave a small nod. They didn't shut it down, he said. That's what matters. He was right. They could have. They could have dismissed it, minimized it, buried it again. But they didn't. Now it becomes official, Ryan continued. Records get pulled, people get questioned. Bennett, I asked. Ryan's expression shifted slightly. He's going to be part of it, he said, whether he wants to or not. Good, I thought, because for too long he hadn't been. As people began filing out, Gregory stood. Slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned to move carefully in a world that had never given him much room. His attorney spoke quietly to him, but I couldn't hear the words. Then he turned, and this time, he saw me. Really saw me. Our eyes met again, but this time, something was different. Recognition, no, Not recognition, but awareness. Like he understood that I wasn't just another face in the room, that I was connected to this in some way. I stood up before I could second guess it. Mom Daniel started, but I was already moving. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what this moment meant. 40 years. 40 years of silence. And now I was walking toward the man whose life had been shaped by that silence. Gregory watched me approach. His expression didn't change, but his eyes followed me, steady, unflinching. I stopped a few feet away. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. How do you speak into a space like this? How do you bridge something that should never have existed? My name is Albert Morrison. Have existed. My name is Albert Morrison, I said, finally. His gaze stayed fixed on me. I know, he said. That surprised me. You do? I asked. He nodded slightly. I read the article, he said. Of course he had. Of course he had. I swallowed. I worked on your case, I said, finally. His gaze stayed fixed on me. I know, he said. That surprised me. You do? I asked. He nodded slightly. I read the article, he said. Of course he had. Of course he had. I swallowed. I worked on your case, I said. I figured, he replied. His voice wasn't angry. Not the way I expected. Not sharp. Not accusing. Just steady. I saw the documents. I continued. Back then. A pause. And? He asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything. I didn't speak up, I said. There it was. The truth. No excuses. No explanations. Just truth. He studied me for a long moment, and I braced myself. For anger, for blame, for something. But what came instead was something I hadn't expected. You are now, he said. That was it. Just that. Not forgiveness. Not judgment. Just acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt heavier than anything else. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He held my gaze, then gave a small nod. Not acceptance, not rejection, just understanding. I've been waiting a long time, and somehow that felt heavier than anything else. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He held my gaze, then gave a small nod. Not acceptance, not rejection, just understanding. I've been waiting a long time, he said. I felt my chest tighten again. I know, I replied, and I did, because I had been waiting too, not in a prison cell, but in silence. And now, neither of us was waiting anymore. The days after the hearing didn't slow down. If anything, they intensified. What had started as a single article had now turned into something far larger than any of us expected. News channels debated it. Legal analysts dissected it. Former prosecutors were suddenly being asked questions they hadn't prepared for in decades. And through all of it, the name Gregory Hale was no longer just a case file. It was a headline, a question, a challenge. I sat in the living room late one evening, watching another segment replay on television. They showed clips from the hearing, the documents, the memo, Bennett's words echoing again. Maintain case integrity. I muted the TV, because I didn't need to hear it again. I already knew what it meant. Daniel sat across from me, his laptop open, reading through an article. They've expanded the investigation, he said. How far, I asked. He looked up. Multiple cases now. Not just Hale. I nodded slowly. Ryan had been right. This wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern, a system, and now it was unraveling. The phone rang. Ryan, I answered immediately. "They've set the next hearing," he said. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning." "That fast?" "Again." "And?" I pressed. There was a pause. "They're recommending vacating the conviction," he said. My breath caught. Not just reviewing, not just questioning, vacating. "They're serious?" I asked. "Yes," Ryan said. "The pressure's too high. The evidence is too clear." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. 40 years. And now, this. "Will he be released?" I asked. "If the judge signs off," Ryan said yes. I opened my eyes. "Then he'll be there," I said. "I know you will," he replied. The next morning felt different from the last. The same courthouse, the same steps. But the energy had changed. This time the crowd was larger. More cameras, more reporters, more voices. Daniel walked beside me closer than before. Not protective, not controlling, just present. Ryan met us near the entrance. "They're expecting a decision today," he said. I nodded. "Then let's go." Inside the courtroom was already full. Every seat taken, every space filled. The air felt thick with anticipation, because everyone knew this wasn't just another hearing. This was the moment. We took our seats, and then Gregory entered. This time, something was different. It wasn't just how he walked. It was how people looked at him, not as a convicted man, not as a closed case, but as someone who might finally be seen. The judge entered. The room stood. And then silence. Real silence. The kind that carries weight. The kind that holds breath. The judge sat, glanced briefly at the documents before him, then looked up. "This court has reviewed the materials presented," he began. His voice was steady, measured. But there was something beneath it. Something undeniable. Evidence introduced during the previous hearing raises significant concerns regarding the integrity of the original trial. I felt Daniel's hand tighten slightly beside me. "Specifically," the judge continued, "the suppression of witness testimony that directly contradicts the prosecution's case." There it was, said out loud, on record, not speculation, not opinion, fact. The court finds that this omission undermines the validity of the conviction. My heart began to pound. Louder now. Faster. Because I knew what was coming. I just needed to hear it. This court hereby vacates the conviction of Gregory Hale. The words hit like a wave. Not sudden, not shocking, but overwhelming. 40 years. Gone. In a single sentence. Gasps filled the room. Voices rose. But I didn't hear any of it clearly, because my focus was on one person. Gregory. He didn't move right away. Didn't react the way I expected. No tears. No collapse. Just stillness. Like his body needed time to catch up with what had just happened. The judge continued speaking formalities, procedures, next steps, but none of it mattered in the same way. Because the truth had already been spoken, the damage acknowledged, the injustice named. And then it was over. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed forward, cameras turned, voices called out. But through all of it, Gregory stood. Slowly. Deliberately. This time, when he moved, there was no weight pulling him down. No invisible chain holding him in place. He was free. I stood too. Not because I needed to, but because I felt it. Something lifting. Something releasing. Daniel looked at me. "You did it," he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. We did. And even that didn't feel entirely right. Because this wasn't about credit. It was about truth. Finally, being seen. Gregory turned again. And once more, our eyes met. But this time, there was no distance, no uncertainty, just understanding. He walked toward me, through the noise, through the crowd, and stopped in front of me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "It's over." I felt my throat tighten. "Yes," I said, "it is." He nodded once, then after a brief pause, "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they carried everything. All the years, all the silence, all the waiting. I shook my head slightly. "I should have done it sooner," I said. He held my gaze. "Maybe," he said, then added gently, "But you did it now, and somehow that was enough." Daniel stepped closer beside me. Gregory glanced at him, then back at me. "Your son?" he asked. "Yes." Gregory nodded. "You raised him well?" he said. I smiled faintly. "I'm still working on it," I replied. For the first time, he smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, but real. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of something broken. It was the beginning of something restored. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to move forward, enough to heal, enough to finally let go. Freedom, I realized, doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't crash into your life with fireworks or dramatic music. It comes quietly, almost gently, like a door that has always been locked, finally opening. A week after the hearing, I stood outside the correctional facility where Gregory Hale had spent most of his life. The sky was clear, bright, too bright almost, as if the world had continued without noticing what had been taken from him. Daniel stood beside me, hands in his pockets, unusually quiet. "You don't have to stay if this is too much," he said softly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I need to be here. Because this moment, this was the part no document could capture. No article could explain. No courtroom could fully resolve. This was the part where a man stepped back into a life that had moved on without him. The gate opened, and there he was, Gregory. He walked slowly at first, like someone testing the ground beneath his feet. Not unsure, just careful. The sunlight hit his face, and for a moment he closed his eyes. Not in pain, in recognition, as if even something as simple as light felt different now. No uniform, no restraints, just a plain shirt worn but clean, a small bag in his hand. 40 years of life reduced to what he could carry. I felt my chest tighten, not with guilt, not anymore, but with something heavier. Witness. I stepped forward. He saw me, and this time, he smiled first. A real one. "Albert," he said. Hearing my name in his voice felt different now. Not tied to a case, not tied to a mistake, just a person. "Gregory," I replied. For a moment, we stood there, neither of us rushing the moment, because after everything, there was no need to. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He nodded. "I didn't think I'd see this day," he admitted. "I didn't know how to answer that. Because how do you respond to lost decades? You just stand there and let the truth exist between you." Daniel stepped forward. "This is my son, Daniel," I said. Gregory extended his hand. "Good to finally meet you," he said. Daniel shook it firmly. "You too, sir." There was respect in his voice, not forced, earned. Gregory glanced between us. "You stood by her," he said. Daniel nodded. "I should have done it sooner." Gregory smiled faintly. "Most people say that about something," he replied. There was no bitterness in his tone, just understanding. And somehow, that made it harder. We walked together toward the parking lot. No cameras, no reporters. That had all happened earlier. This moment, this was private, as it should be. "What will you do now?" I asked. Gregory looked ahead. "Honestly," he said. "Yes. I don't know," he admitted, and that made sense. Because freedom after that long isn't simple. It isn't a return. It's a beginning, but not the kind you prepare for. "I used to think about this day," he continued, "all the time." I listened quietly. I imagined what he'd say, what he'd feel, what I'd do first. He shook his head slightly. "And now, it's quieter than I expected," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "It is." We reached the car, but none of us moved to get in right away. Because the moment wasn't finished yet. I read everything Gregory said suddenly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The articles, the documents, your statement." I held his gaze. And he took a slow breath. "You told the truth," he said. I replied. He nodded. "That matters," he said. It did. But it didn't erase what had happened. And I knew he knew that. "Albert," he said, after a moment, "you didn't put me there." The words caught me off guard. "But I didn't stop it," I said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." A pause. Then, "But you helped get me out." I swallowed. Because that was the part I didn't know how to carry. "I don't know if that balances anything," I admitted. "It doesn't," he said simply, honest, direct, but not cruel. "Some things don't balance," he continued. "They just exist." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "And now?" I asked. He looked out at the road ahead. "Now I decide what to do with what's left," he said. There was strength in that. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Daniel opened the car door. "Let's get you somewhere comfortable," he said. Gregory smiled slightly. "I'd like that." We drove in silence at first. Not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that comes when too much has been said already. After a while, Gregory spoke again. "You ever think about what would have happened if you spoke up back then?" he asked. I stared out the window. "Yes," I said, "every day." And I turned to him. "I think your life would have been different," I said. He nodded. "Mine too," I added. That surprised him. "How?" "I would have known who I was sooner," I said. He considered that, then nodded slowly. "That matters too," he said. It did. Not as much as his lost years. But it mattered, because silence changes people. And so does truth. When we finally reached the house, the sun was beginning to set. The light was softer now. Warmer. Gregory stepped out of the car and looked around. "This is where you live?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded. "It's nice. Simple. Honest." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, the three of us in the quiet of the evening. No headlines, no pressure, no past pulling at us. Just presence. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Albert Morrison's story is not just about justice, it is about timing courage and the quiet cost of silence. Sometimes we think that if we miss the moment to do the right thing, it is gone forever. That one decision defines everything that follows. But life is more complicated than that. Truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't disappear. It settles. It hides. It survives in places we forget to look. Albert spent 40 years carrying the weight of a choice she didn't make. She believed that silence had sealed the past, that nothing she did later could change it. But when the truth finally resurfaced, it didn't ask whether it was too late. It only asked whether someone was willing to stand up now. And that is the lesson. It is never too late to tell the truth. It may not undo the damage. It may not return lost time. But it can restore dignity. It can create justice where none existed. It can change the ending of a story that once felt finished. Gregory Hale lost decades of his life. Nothing can give that back. But he did not lose everything. Because in the end, someone chose courage over comfort. Someone chose truth over silence. And that choice mattered. If you've ever stayed silent when you knew something was wrong, if you've ever wondered whether speaking up now would make a difference, this story is for you. What do you think? Do you believe it's ever too late to make things right? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that matter. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing where these stories reach.